If you have worked with ZBrush for any length of time, you know that it's different. Love it or hate it, there's no denying that some of the ways that things work in this software can be unintuitive or cumbersome. Over the years, I've written little macros, scripts, and plugins to get around a lot of these issues or to speed up my workflow. Lucky for you, I am now releasing a lot of these for free. Introducing Ryan's tools. Let's take a look at what I've cooked up and how it will totally supercharge your ZBrush experience. Okay, starting at the top, we have EasyPrimitives. By default in ZBrush, there are like 4 or 5 completely different ways to create primitives, and they all have their own issues. Either they create primitives with awkward topology, or you have to switch to some unintuitive mode to make them, or the new primitive replaces the subtool you're working on, or it creates the new primitive somewhere far away from what you're working on and in a completely different scale. Well, my EasyPrimitives solves all of these issues. Just one click on the primitive you want, and it gets made in the same size and position as the subtool you currently have active. So let's add a new spike to the tail here. So we've got the tail spikes as the active subtool. I'll just click on a cone, and it makes it in the exact right place. So let me just scale this, and we can lengthen this out and just rotate it, move it where it needs to go. It starts out with the gizmo active, so it's just ready to start moving. All right, let's try something else. You can actually do this with masks as well. So I'm going to select the main body, and let's just draw a mask on here, the size of the eyeballs. Doesn't have to be precise, it can be kind of sloppy. So we'll just click on this. Now you'll notice that I had symmetry turned on when I made the mask, so it makes symmetrical primitives. So now it's just really easy to put this into place. And something else you can do is draw a mask right on the center line, and that will just create one that's centered. So let's go ahead and create something for the tongue here. And now what we can do is just pull this out and have a nice tongue. Next up is EasyMesh. Now there are other plugins that do basically the same thing as this, but I think mine does it more simply and reliably. In ZBrush, the detail that you get from Dynamesh is different depending on the size of the object. That makes it really unpredictable and difficult to tell what kind of detail level you're going to get when you run Dynamesh. Okay, so let's try setting the resolution to, I don't know, something like 500 and hit Dynamesh. Okay, so you can see it Dynameshed it. But one thing you might run into is if you've got a really small model, let's zoom into this small one here, and if you try the same resolution setting, what'll happen is it'll be a totally different resolution because the size of the object is so small. So you might have to crank this all the way up, the highest it'll go, and still it's not enough to capture all that detail. Now let's zoom out again, and let's find this really big model here. And if I set this all the way to the lowest, it might be so dense that it could crash the computer. So I'm afraid to even hit Dynamesh. So the solution for this is the EasyMesh plugin. All you do is you set a detail level or hit the EasyMesh button, and it dynameshes it to a predictable amount every time regardless of the size of the model. So this giant model is at this detail level. Now if you want it a little bit higher or lower, you could click on these buttons, or you could just hit Control-Z to undo that and try it again on a different setting. So same thing on this really small model. Let's zoom in on this, and we'll just use EasyMesh at the same density setting. So you can see you get the exact same result. So let's say you're sculpting on this, you make some changes, I don't know, increase the detail here or something like that. Now, normally the way you would refresh the Dynamesh is to hold down Control and then click and drag in an open area, but you don't want to do that anymore. What you want to do is just click on EasyMesh again, or assign that to a hotkey. I have mine set to Shift A, and so every time I want to refresh Dynamesh, I just hit Shift A. It's really quick, really easy, does it to the correct density level every time. Moving on, here's some helpful shortcuts for working with color and material. I often need to switch between sculpting, poly painting, and seeing texture maps on my model. And this meant switching colors and materials and textures and colorize modes on and off every time I switched, and that got old real fast. So I wrote these buttons that just quickly flip you between modes. So here in texture map mode, you can see there's a texture map that helps me visualize where my UV seams are. Just go back into poly paint mode, start poly painting, and if you want to see it without any texture on it, so you can just see the sculpting detail by itself, just go into sculpting mode. Very easy to flip back and forth. And then I've also got an easy fill color button. So that just simply fills the model with the color instead of messing around with turning on RGB mode or switching between these modes, then going up to color and then fill. It's just one button right there, real easy. And then also fill material. So let's say you want to change this to some other material. There's not currently a material applied to this, so that's why I can just flip to all these different materials. But let's say I want to apply one of these. So I just go to fill material, and now that's locked on there. So any materials that I change, it doesn't actually change the material on the body. So what if I want to clear that and reset it to the way it was? Well, I just click clear material, and now I'm back to where I was, and I can apply any material I want to it. Now here's a button that I made just because I like how Photoshop does it. So let's just change our colors to something else here. In Photoshop, there's a button like this where you just click on it and it restores your colors to the basic black and white. One last thing under color and material, there's polypaint from Morph Uv. Now if you go into Morph Uv mode, you can see your model flattened out here. And you can actually do polypainting in this mode, but by default in Zbrush, any of that polypainting doesn't transfer back into your 3D model once you exit Morph UV mode. So this button actually lets you do that. So I'll just get a painting brush out here, and we'll just paint something really quick on here, just simple. And click on Polypaint from Morph UV. All right, let's see what happened. Okay, so you can see that polypainting came back from Morph UV mode. This is really handy. If you lay out your UVs very efficiently, you can create all kinds of patterns that are really difficult to try to paint onto a model when it's in 3D mode. After color and material, we have some buttons for mirroring and welding across the 3 axes. Now this replaces the mirror and weld and mirror buttons in the geometry and deformation menus. Now the problem with those buttons is that they have an awkward interface. Also, they don't work with models that have subdivision levels, and also the mirror and weld button only works on objects that are on this side of the scene. If you have this boot on the other side and you try to use it, it'll give you an error message. My buttons fix all of these problems. So first, let's try flip X here with this boot, and it just flips it to the other side and it keeps your subdivision levels. Now if you want to flip an object like the pants, this will work just fine as well, keeping those subdivision levels. Now if you want to mirror and weld, let's go ahead and click on Weld X. Now what this does is it copies one side and merges it with the other side. Now this does destroy your subdivision levels. There's no way around that. However, if the object doesn't cross the center line, then you can just click Weld X. And now you've got your boot on both sides and you've maintained your subdivision levels. Now this works in both directions. If I undo that, flip X, and then Weld X from this direction, it works just as well. Not so with the default mirror and weld built into Zbrush. Okay, I'm so excited about this next feature called Trash Bin. Now, you know how deleting a subtool in Zbrush can't be undone? Of course you do, because Zbrush gives you an annoying pop-up every time you do it. Not with my plugin, however. Just click on Trash, and the deleted object is sent into a new tool called Trash. Now, if you decide you don't want to have that deleted, just click on Untrash. You can assign these to hotkeys for really easy usage. Now, if you've got a lot of dense subtools in the trash and it's hogging up all your RAM, just click on Take Out the Trash, and it'll purge all but the most recently deleted subtool. Finally, we're getting to some random extras. First, let's look at Amp Detail. Now, this is a brush that I've had released for a while now, but this is a new updated version. Just simply click on it, and Zbrush prepares the model for exaggerating details. So now that that's done, just set your draw size and just brush on exaggerated detail. Easy as that. Next, there's Grow Mask. So if you've got a mask on an area and you want to expand that out to the rest of the object, just click on Grow Mask. And what it'll do is just expand that mask out, and you can hit Escape whenever it's where you want it to be. Okay, up next is Smart Sub Div. So this is an alternative to subdividing your model the regular way. In Zbrush, when you subdivide, you might notice that there's a little bit of shrinkage that occurs. With Smart Sub Div, there's no shrinkage. It just maintains the same volume. So you don't have to worry about your model shrinking or the lowest subdivision level changing shape at all. It's just going to keep that the same. Okay, now on to anti-aliasing. Now this is something you could always do by clicking on AA half. The downside to this is that it forces your document to be half the size, not very useful. So with my button, just click anti-aliasing and you get full screen anti-aliasing. And just click it again to toggle it off. The next one is going to be great for fixing a glitch that sometimes happens in Zbrush. Every once in a while, ZBrush will go into a strange mode where even if edit is turned on, you'll find yourself clicking and dragging out copies of your model instead of sculpting. Or maybe the canvas is frozen and nothing will move. Just simply click on Reset Canvas and then click No, and everything will be put back to normal. Okay, next is Center Pivot. Now this just fixes a little problem I have sometimes. Let's go switch to a different subtool here, and you'll notice that the pivot point for this object is somewhere off the screen. Instead of going and hunting for it, just click on Center Pivot. That was easy. Okay, next up is Del Smaller. Now when you're working with scan data or sometimes with live Boolean, what can happen is you'll end up with all these little shards, little tiny extra pieces of geometry that don't really belong anywhere, and it can be a pain to go through and delete them one at a time. So let's hide the main body of the model here. And what I want to do is select the largest shard that is something that I want to delete, but making sure that it's no bigger than things I want to keep. So I'm just going to zoom in here on this one because I think this is the biggest one. So I'll just alt click on it to make sure it's the active selected subtool. Okay, good. And now we'll just click on Del Smaller. Go ahead and click OK. So this might take a minute, but it's going to go through and find all the subtools that are smaller than the one that is currently selected and permanently delete them. Okay, great. Looks like it worked. So we're just left with that one straggler and we can just delete that one. Finally, we have Crease Levels. Now, if you turn on dynamic subdivision, you can see that there is creasing applied to some of these edges, keeping them nice and hard. Now, underneath the crease subpalette, there is this crease amount slider, and you can set this to whatever you want to change the hardness of that crease, but the problem is it doesn't update automatically in the viewport. You have to go to dynamic, turn that off, and then turn it back on to see the effect. And now you can see that that sharpness is a little softer now. But if you want to change that, you have to go back into crease, and you have to set this to a different amount. So that becomes very tedious. So why I made these buttons, all you do is you just click left and right, and the amount of crease just updates automatically. And you can set that hardness exactly where you want it to go much more easily. All right, and that's it. I hope this custom plugin is helpful for you. Everything in it I have hotkeyed or placed in my custom interface for easy access. Now the download link is in the description below. Just unzip it and follow the README for installation instructions, but it's very easy, I promise. And you can learn how I made a lot of these on my lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning tutorials. The links to those are in the description as well. I want to give a big thanks to Marcus Civis and Nick Miller for their help in putting all this together. All right, thanks for watching, and be sure to leave a comment below.